We'll we'll just start recording now, and just so you know, we'll do a Q&A at the end. I forgot to check with our speakers, but hopefully that works for you both, so that question and answers could be held until we've heard from both speakers, and we'll stop the recording before we do the Q&A. So today we have Jonathan Reimer, who's going to be speaking on the Braided Wildfire Knowledge Mobilization Project. And we have Joe Gilchrist, who's phoning in today from Brazil airport, which I'm incredibly impressed with, who's just completed attending the COP30. And he works for the Salish Fire Keepers and Thunderbird Collective. But perhaps both of our speakers, you could expand on your introductions as I hand the reins over to you both. So I think, Jonathan, you are up first.
Rosalind, and maybe I'll start by sharing the screen. Can you just confirm that you see something, that title page of sorts?
Yes, yeah.
Right. Good start. So yeah, as Lynn mentioned, my name's Jonathan Reimer. I work at the Capital Regional District, and just quickly about my background, because I know I have a lot of really strong ecologists, biologists, and land managers on the side on the meeting today. And my background's really on the fire side as a fire manager. First with BC Wildfire Service for many years, then Parks Canada. I was on a national incident management team. I was, director of the WUI branch on Canada's largest fire that over in Fort Mac. Worked for some time as an emergency manager with emergency management and climate readiness as the director of the Provincial Emergency Coordination Center, and have now landed here in the Capital Region where I'm the manager of emergency programs. So just to say, I'm on the operational side of emergencies and fires. That said, my Master of Science is in environment management, and I'm a wildfire manager certified with the Association of Fire Ecology. And fire ecology is something that means a lot to me, and most of what we're going to be talking about today falls into that bucket. With that, let's get into it. I want to talk about the Braided Wildfire Knowledge Mobilization Initiative, but to do that, I think it's important to talk about what's going on with fire on Vancouver Island. Why is this happening, and what can we do about it? And so I'll start with the really obvious thing is that the way that wildfire has come to dominate our summers in the last 10 years or so in BC is just unlike recent memories. I know all of you know this, but this is a graph version of that same statement. So this is area burned in the 2020s of the decade. And we burned about as much land in BC over the last 5 years here as, say, the 50 years before 2021, 10, right? So it's a lot of fire in BC. This is another version of that, where you have about 100 years of area burned in the yellow, and then about the 5 years after 2017 in orange, and just a single year there in the red. And unfortunately, we don't get 2024 or 2025 in this part of the world in our area. Not a lot of fire generally, but certainly those 2 years have been very active years. And so this is a picture of the Mount Underwood fire, southwest of Port Alberni there. And that happened earlier this year, went from kind of 0 to 3,500 hectares in a couple days. And that's not such a big deal for the interior, but that's a big deal for the coast anywhere, and specifically Vancouver Island. And just before that, we had the Wesley Ridge fire. Last year, we had the Old Man Lake fire that put up a column you could see from Parliament, which is, a new thing for me. And even this year, we got smoked out by a lot of the fire to our south, which had the Bear Gulch wildfire burned in Washington, but that was 8,000 hectares. So we're seeing more fire in our landscape in a way that is unlike most of our recent memory. And it's not just out there on the landscape, it's also starting to enter our communities. So this is a photo from the Wesley Ridge fire that happened this year. This is kind of the edge of the community of Dashwood. And you can see that, dozens of homes were almost lost on that fire. Speaking to the incident commander, they were very surprised that We were able to save them, and partly because of the really good work done by BC Wildfire Service and by Dashwood Fire Departments and others. But we shouldn't be expect to be this lucky on all of our incidents in the future. We will have more homes threatened, and eventually we'll be losing homes to fire on Vancouver Island and in the CDF. And so this is my understanding of kind of your area of interest. CDF and its associated ecosystems. I have a very small part of that. I work in the capital region. We go up as far as, say, northern Galliano here. I work for a local government. That regional district, we have, 200 plus services, includes the watershed, includes regional parks. We have 13 independent municipalities, and I'm not here to speak on behalf of any of them, but I am the project lead for this Braided Wildfire Knowledge Mobilization project. And I get to speak to a lot of smart people as part of that. And they tell me a story about fire in our landscapes that I think is important and you don't hear a lot. And so that's what I'm here to share with you folks today. But that said, I know we have a ton of knowledge on this call, both Western and Indigenous. And so if I'm missing something or leaving something out, please give me a poke and correct me. I'd love to kind of tell a fuller, richer story. So with that, just some history of the CDF is it's not like any other part of the coast. It's very special, and that was immediately recognized by the very first Europeans who saw this land. So one of them was Captain George Vancouver. He called it an uncultivated country. We're going to pick up on that thread here in a second. But it was an extensive space that wore the appearance of just being magically cleared. Very similarly, Captain James Douglas, he founded Fort Victoria. He's probably the most kind of the first governor of BC, I believe. But he called this place like a perfect Eden, that it was just totally unlike the dreary northwest coast, the wooded, rugged regions, that it might have just dropped from the sky into its present position, you know. What a statement. But it was a natural park and a plain of nearly 6 acres. So there's something special about this area. And in a completely, apparently unrelated um, observation, there was a lot of people that lived there. And those people used a lot of fire on the landscape. They burnt miles of ground. They did it to promote for various reasons we'll talk a little bit more about. But that fire tended to be the fires were small, and it was the custom apparently that you could just run right through the fire if you needed to because the flames were not that very intense. So this, brings me the question about how much fire are we talking about in the CDF traditionally? Like what's normal in this ecosystem? And there's various ways that we can answer that. There's endocrinology and others. The best one I've seen is using lake sediment. And so this was a really well done study that looked at fire history on Pender Island near Duncan and a spot near Langford here. But would be generally representative. And they found that the historical fire return interval, which is a kind of a technical word, but it basically means if you put a pin in the ground, how often would that specific spot burn? How often does fire revisit a single place? And they found that it's somewhere between, 27, 26, or 41 years. In the forested areas, maybe shorter in meadows. Now that is an amazing amount of fire. It can be kind of hard to picture. And so if you take these numbers seriously and you put it onto our modern landscapes with the ecosystems that we currently have, some back of the envelope calculations. So these are not part of the studies. This is a back end of the envelope calculation that I am doing. And there's lots of reasons it can be higher or lower, but it can get us into the ballpark is that, say, in an average year on Salt Spring Island, about 500 hectares would have burnt. A normal year, not a big year, not a small year. Across the CDF zone, if you take the most conservative estimate, from this, so the 41-year estimate, we're talking of over 6,000 hectares are burning on a normal year. That's a lot of fire. We have not seen anything close to that amount of fire, even, with our current resurgence. Again, it can be hard to really picture what this can look like. I really appreciate this, which was made by Paul Hesberg and a production company. They paired up. He's a kind of a famous forest ecologist in the Northwest, and they made this really cool visualization that I'd like to share with you. I think the audio will come through. Even if it doesn't, not a big deal because there is, the subtitles here. So I'm just going to press play.
You can see that in dry forests, trees were open ground and fairly far apart. Fires were here. Burn, they were typically not very severe. Further up the hill in the western forest, trees were denser, less frequent. Historical photos. And in this country, we provided a
So that's the end of the visualization, but you can kind of see this interplay between fire regimes and ecosystem types and how that varies across different types. But I do want to pick up on his comment about natural mechanisms here, because I think that's important, is that the natural mechanisms of the landscape were deeply entwined with the people who lived there. And this was never, I'll move on, an uncultivated country, and it did not fall from the sky.
Jonathan, just so you know, we didn't get awesome audio on it. If there was anything crucial besides what you just summarized, perhaps repeat that.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, I wonder. It
It
doesn't
was
seem.
okay. Like I caught some. I don't know if others also caught some, but I think we got the gist and the visuals
Yeah.
were good.
Okay. The idea was that you had pretty frequent fire in the drier systems. Those fires were a bit less severe. You have some mortality, but it's certainly mixed severity. Most of the older trees would survive those low intensity fires. As you get up into the moister areas, less frequent fire, bit more severity, bit more mortality, but not always. And then as you get into the colder forests, and we have some of those as well on Vancouver Island, then you'd have much longer, perhaps in the hundreds of years, fire intervals, and those fires tended to be quite severe and have a lot of mortality, but far less often. And there's just an interplay with that distribution of ecosystems and species and fire, and that's how it was just for a very long time. And that formed a natural mechanism of limiting fire spread across the landscape because you had this patchwork of different ecosystems and vegetation types. That's what we want to take away from it. That didn't happen all by itself. I don't know if you've noticed here. This is a totally side thing, but every time or any time that we do get a lightning storm out here, you can go on to like Facebook or Reddit or whatever your like social media of choices or just outside, and people don't know what is happening. They don't know what the sound of lightning is because it doesn't happen here very often. Not anything like the interior, not like other parts of Canada. So we don't get a lot of lightning fires, but we do have a lot of fire. So that's one way of demonstrating just how much this land was cultivated by the First Nations people. Where I live, that's the Lekwungen speaking peoples, and they cultivated this land in 100 different ways. Fire is just one of them. They did it for 100 different reasons. Camas is just one of them, but it's perhaps the most obvious one. That's what this is a picture of. And then I won't say much more about it. Can say a lot more about but it was turned off by the Bushfire Act of 1874 and similar legislation where that was criminalized. The traditional land care and the tools that they used, those were criminalized, and that is the great turning point of our CDF ecosystems and its care. And at the same time, and kind of going hand in hand is that this rise of fire suppression. And so this is a map of our area burnt on the landscape since about or 1920. We don't have records before that, or at least not good records. And you can see that there's a fair bit of fire still in the 20s, a little bit less in the 30s, but still some. But that peters out really quickly until most of us have, little or no lived experience of fire on our landscapes, in our backyard. That's not an accident. I need to take some responsibility, honestly, for this type of work. Is that I am a fire manager. I started my career in the Coastal Fire Center. I put out hundreds of fires, and many of those protected folks that have homes and property. But I also need to reckon with the cumulative impacts of the work that I've done and people like me have done to the ecosystems. And to help understand those impacts, it's really important to draw a distinction that cuts across the capital region and causes immense amounts of confusion, even for well-meaning ecologists and foresters. And that is the difference between our wet and dry forests on Vancouver Island. Uh, that confusion, I think, it's really in good faith. It's understandable. You can get out of your car, walk around a mossy cedar fir ecosystem, and then get in your car, drive 15 minutes away, walk around a mossy cedar fir ecosystem, and they're entirely and completely different. And they need to be managed that way. We have some of the richest temperate rainforests anywhere on Earth, some of the longest fire return intervals anywhere in Canada. We're talking in excess of 1,000 years. And when you remove fire from those ecosystems, it's not ecologically significant, and these are not areas that tend to respond well to, wildfire risk reduction through fuel management, for example. But our dry forests that are often very close to those same forests, they are some of the most fire-dependent ecosystems, or at least forest ecosystems in Canada. These places rely on regular fire for their stand structure and their species distribution. And by removing fire from these fire-dependent ecosystems, that's akin to removing rain from the rainforest. And it's a really big deal. It's catastrophic. And you can see that in a lot of different ways. Perhaps the most obvious is just the collapse of our Garry Oak ecosystems, those meadows. Part of that, of course, is due to, land conversion and development, but at least as much of that is due to fire exclusion and conifer encroachment that comes after that. Um, and even where we have maintained our forests in the CDF, they're often deeply departed from our historical conditions. So these pictures are from North Cowichan. They could be anywhere. And I want to make a quick point here about active management. Because we talk a lot about protected and natural areas and conservation in the CDF, and we do that for good reasons. A lot of our land has been converted for various uses. But our conserved lands are largely degraded because of fire exclusion. And when we spend millions of dollars on extinguishing natural fires over hundreds of years, or at least 100 years, when we put folks in jail for traditional fire management tools and their use, those are all forms of active management. And so for me, the tension is less between, conservation and management. It's whether we manage through neglect or we manage through stewardship. And so when we removed fire from these stands, we've changed stands that typically would have had something like, 300 or 400 stems a hectare into something that sometimes will have up to, 1,500 stems a hectare. And apart from the obvious wildfire hazard that poses, this is a disaster for our species at risk, and it exacerbates drought as these trees compete for scarce water. And so this is the story so far. We had, for hundreds, thousands of years, this coevolution of vegetation and landscapes and people and fire. And then we had the European settlers come in and basically break those connections and say, the people who care for these lands, let's remove them from the lands and let's remove the tools that they use to care for those lands. And we did so very successfully for a long time. And now we are starting to see fire reassert itself on the landscape in a new and more, damaging, destructive way. So we have a choice. we can look to restore fire as a stabilizing force in our communities and our ecosystems. Or we can double down on the strategy that brought us here, that strategy of treating fire as an enemy. So perhaps the most important question is who gets to make that choice? And the answer is complicated. Uh, it's very kind of fashionable right now to say that it's an all of society approach, and that's clearly true. You know, that it's industry and it's governments and it's communities and it's, you know, nonprofits and education and all of those things, but that's pretty slippery, right? You know, for my part, I'm an employee of a local government. And so this is a map that to me tells me something important about who gets to make certain decisions about fire use, you know, fire regulations, about who responds to new wildfires, who controls development in that wildland-urban interface. Uh, and altogether, the different levels of local government and First Nations, Islands Trust Councils, fire improvements, those are just in the capital region, 50 different jurisdictions that have a piece that share responsibility for governing fire risk. That's a lot. And perhaps most importantly, fire doesn't see any of these imaginary lines that we draw on our imaginary maps. You know, it sees one shared landscape with corridors and barriers to fire. And that if we want to manage fire risk, that's landscape level is what is the level that we need to act on. And so that is the goal of the Braided Wildfire Knowledge Mobilization Initiative. We have been inspired by some of the previous work that has been done in Canada or internationally, some of that prescribed burn associations or fire safe council or guardianship programs. And we're trying to understand how that we can take those learnings and apply them in the capital region. One of the things we know we need to do is to connect communities of practice across those dotted lines. We're always going to need a strong fire response, uh, you know, sector. And that's not just BC Wildfire Service and the fire departments. It's also, you know, watershed and regional parks and Parks Canada and Department of National Defense and others. You know, we have been doing really good work. We have a lot of capacity now in our municipalities as of the last year or two in FireSmart. And so I do want to shout out to the really good work that the Community FireSmart Resiliency Collaborative is doing in our area. And that's starting to also spread to some of our First Nations. We're not going to be able to exclude wildfire, so we need to be prepared for it. A lot of that falls to our emergency programs, and perhaps most importantly, we need to restore the level, our Indigenous stewardship on the landscapes. So that is our goal, cross-jurisdictional stewardship, blurring some of our dotted lines. I would love to tell you exactly what that's going to look like, but we're honestly in early days. It's a 3-year project and we're only a few months in, but I can tell you the ingredients. It's going to include cross-training. It's going to include capacity building. It's probably going to include more prescribed fire and vegetation management, and it's certainly going to include knowledge sharing. And we've held a number of these events already. One of them being, you know, the first wildfire readiness meeting of its kind in the capital region. Just this month, we held an event about parks and fire with FireSmart BC and Parks Canada and BC Wildfire Service. It's been really great. And what we've learned is that the future is already here. We just need to scale it up. So, you know, Joe and others are doing great work with cultural fire. We want to see more of it. Department of National Defense is doing great work with prescribed fire. Let's see more of that. We can't put fire everywhere. We know that. And where we can't, maybe vegetation management makes sense. Parks Canada has done some great work on that. Let's see more of that. And similarly with FireSmart BC, we need to start working from our values out. And perhaps what I want to leave with you guys today is, you know, that we live in a place of fire. We always have. But we're coming to terms with the fact that we can't dominate it and we can't eliminate it. And so we must learn to live alongside it. And so the Braided Wildfire Knowledge Mobilization is just really one small piece of that work. Thank you.
Big round of virtual applause for Jonathan. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. And just like sitting with your last sentence there, acknowledging, yes, we've always lived in a place with fire, especially thinking of our First Nations friends. Like it's just a kind of new concept for a lot of us. Like fire might be good um, when it's in your backyard. Anyway, thank you so much. That was really great. And just a reminder, if you think you might forget your questions, you can jot them in the chat or on your computer or notepad, and we'll ask Jonathan some questions at the end. And so now, yes, Joe, we're going to hand over to you. I hope your setting in your airport waiting space is okay. Oh, there you are. Thank you. So yeah, Joe Gilchrist, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, Joe Gilchrist. It was a great presentation, Jonathan, and it was great to see you too. Um, and I also could be moving down to Saanich to bring fire to the area with the First Nations people there. Tiffany Joseph, if anybody knows her, is trying to bring me down there to reintroduce fire. They remember why they burned. They remember what they burned for. They just don't have the capacity to put fire on the ground. So they want to bring me down there to begin a burning and teaching the youth and building up partnerships in the area and slowly move it northward and eastward and just spread around the island that fire is a main tool that was used for thousands of years in the area. And now with climate change, and I just came from COP30 in Belém, Brazil, and climate change isn't getting any better, it's getting worse. Our expect our droughts and our heat waves to get more intense, as well as rain events and electrical storms will become more intense, along with wind and things like that. So, with the forest that hasn't been burned in 100 to 150 years now, as Jonathan was showing, uh, different encroachment happens, and especially coastal Douglas fir, it really tries to take over the area. And not only does it become too thick, but it also just keeps growing little seedlings in between. And in a drought situation and heat wave, if a fire was to start, there's plenty of ladder fuel for the fire to climb to the tops of the trees and become a crown fire and quickly become unstoppable with the current firefighting technology that we have. And so the solution to those problems is to go back, to Indigenous land stewardship and, build partnerships and work together. Now, there's a lot of work to do for sure. And uh, as as Jonathan was saying, the Indigenous people used fire on the land for many different reasons, for hunting, for fishing, uh, for berry picking, medicines, and other forbs and things like that that we used in our cooking and cleaning. Of course, we had fire all year round, 365 days a year, and so even just by having a fire, all day long, and we would clean the forest that way by going out and bringing wood and debris in to burn, and that in itself, kept the forest clean around the communities. Um, but then the first thing that like Jonathan was saying is you want to make sure that the areas around the community is safe and that the community is safe from wildfire first. And then you look at your hunting areas and your berry picking and meadows and things like that. Just a couple of stories about how cultural burning changes the land. One is, sorry about the noise. One is about salmon bearing streams. Indigenous people used fire alongside the creeks and rivers where the salmon come to spawn, and that would that burning in the spring or the fall, mostly the fall time, every 4 years. The nutrients would go into the ground with the rain, and the roots would follow, and the roots would become entangled with different species like alder, birch, cottonwood, willow, especially, and uh, that tangling of the roots when it was time for a freshet or a flood event, then those roots would hold the banks together, and the water would just run normally. Without cultural burning, the roots don't go down deep anymore. They stay on top. They actually the 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 top layer is rotting, so that's nutrients. So the roots actually come up, and then so it forms a mat on top. The water, when a freshet or a flood event happens, the water goes underneath, lifts up the system of plants and whatever is there, like willow and alder. And if there's fir encroaching, which is not good, also, um, it'll just pull it away, and then you're left with cobblestones. And that's what we're seeing today along our creeks and rivers where salmon spawn. Is that they're not getting the shade, they're not getting the slow water movement, and the water is definitely warmer than it should be, and then they're getting the intense floods. So that's just from not cultural burning. It in 150 years, we'll say 100 years, and if it was burned 4 times, that's 25 burn cycles that are missed, and that's why we're seeing the encroachment of Douglas fir and cedar and things like that alongside, which the roots don't hold on to the banks as good as the other species. And then the other story I have is with huckleberries. And so huckleberries grow high up in the mountain, and like say around Whistler Height, where the ski areas are. And those fires generally burn every 100 to 200 years, either by indigenous people or by lightning strike. Um, and those are generally good hunting areas up there, and lots of different medicines. But in order to keep it as a huckleberry patch, you burn it every 4 years without missing a cycle. Because if you miss a cycle, then the trees become too big for the um, flames to kill. So you burn every 4 years, you kill the seedlings of the trees that want to encroach, like spruce and balsam. And then you're left with patches of alder and willow, which is great shade for the berries. And the berries they like 50% shade, so you're able to have a better berry production. And so by burning every 4 years for thousands and thousands of years, you keep it as a berry patch. And evidence shows that, from north of Merritt all the ways down past the U.S. border to past Yakima, that was one giant berry patch, over hundreds of thousands of hectares. And it wasn't all burnt at the same time, but it was burned in cycles so that different areas were ready to pick at different times. And I just want to say, just as I end, I guess, that about the partnerships and things like that, that we need to change laws to bring back cultural burning, not only for us, but for our children and their children to come. The only thing that we could give them is um, clean air, clean water, and good food and a safe place to live. And if we don't do anything, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. My prediction is that with the current encroachment of trees and the worsening weather, that eventually we're going to have a drought, a heat wave, and a wind event, and an unstoppable fire, and there won't be enough ways for people to escape the fire. And so that's going to be extremely tragic and catastrophic. And I hope that we are able to come together to avoid that problem. Thank you. And yeah, I guess we're ready for questions.
That was so much information there. Thank you so much, Joe. Everybody, round of applause, please. Especially, we didn't hear any of the noise in the background, by the way. That was really good audio. I'm so impressed with technology and yeah, your ability to deliver that great knowledge in the setting you're in. Thank you, though. So we're going to move to question and answer now. So we can either, I think, Justine, you're going to help unmute people if they want to speak. You can put your hand up or you can put it in the chat. We'll help monitor the chat. And just a reminder too, before we stop recording, that there will be another, the third webinar is to be determined, but likely the 3rd of December. So just stay tuned and we'll keep you posted on that. And that's on hang on, I don't remember what the 3rd of December one is on. Is that the Biodiversity Atlas and Policy Toolkit, or is that one on the 11th of December? Anyway.
I just popped it in the chat. That's the
Okay.
11th of December.
Oh,
December
yeah.
3rd is SAYSHOT BC land use planning and process.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just the talking head. Okay, fabulous. So we can stop recording now. Thank you. And then, yeah, we'll just